All right, this is going to be relatively quick because True Blood's going to be on here in a couple minutes, so I don't want to miss that. Um, Earlier today, I saw Lou Rockwell post on his political blog, which is something where he posts very, very brief little things, and I was sorry to see I didn't see a link to this story, but apparently at the Republican National Convention, they will be playing a video montage tribute, so to speak, to Ron Paul, emphasizing the fact that he's delivered so many babies. This is despite the pointed fact that they did not invite him even to attend the event. I think this is really funny. I think it is pretty much very telling evidence on where whoever it is who's organizing this event, who I'm assuming it's the most powerful RNC people, including Romney, but probably some others. Not necessarily people who are elected, by the way. These could be party functionaries or other bureaucrats. It's a really good indication on their view of Ron Paul. The view is I think the only thing you can take from this is that they are absolutely against and very probably terrified of his politics, of what he advocates, probably across the entire board. I mean, I'm sure most of the people there, if we're going to talk about socialist views, they're not socially conservative. Republicans, they use drugs just as much as anybody else. I don't think that most of them, there are a few exceptions, are really that moral, have that many moral qualms about it. Republicans tend to not be, I mean, they'll talk against homosexuality, but a very large number of them are homosexual. If you want, there's actually a good documentary out there titled The Conspiracy of Silence that the Discovery Channel actually had made back about 15 years ago. It's hard to find. I downloaded it maybe 10 years ago. The Discovery Channel produced it. They advertised that they were going to show it, and then somebody with enough power to get them to not air it had them never broadcast it, and then one of the producers or somebody leaked it. On the other hand, I know people, gay people, who have interned as Republicans in Washington, D.C., and they basically confirm this. This doesn't say every single Republican is gay, but many of them are. But when they're in the public eye, they're all family, social conservative. Of course, they're vehemently pro-war. Why exactly varies depending on who you're talking to. I think there's a couple different reasons. All of them are pretty crappy. And of course, Ron Paul is adamantly against that. In terms of his financial policies, they're mostly probably ignorant. I mean, very few of them, other than the most savvy, are going to be able to talk intelligently about Federal Reserve or fiscal policy. To the extent that they do understand it, they reject it. When it comes to the more general idea of free markets, they do pay rhetorical lip service, but only to a point, and that point is not very far. Basically, they accept the status quo, and sometimes not even that. If you listen to them in an environment where they're not being grilled for their free market credentials, they are just as interventionist as anybody else. In fact, I remember the first time I ever watched Newt Gingrich speak. He wasn't on the floor of Congress or anything. I think it was in the after he left Congress, actually. He was giving a lecture on health care. And without going into details, you can see how something like Romney Care would originate from Republicans, because he was extremely interventionist. So Ron Paul is anathema to the Republican establishment, more so basically than any other political entity, far more than any Democrat, even the likes of, say, Dennis Kucinich. On the other hand, they realize that he is popular, that he has a following, a very devoted, and I say to him, not to him, but to his ideology following, that's relatively decent sized in numbers. If we're talking about the entire country, we are talking about a few million people. And people inspired by him have launched a widespread grassroots movement to basically hijack the Republican Party. Now, this has not been totally successful, not by a long shot, but it's had some success. And so I think that they have concluded, though, okay, we don't want him there, because if they let him speak, for instance, he would give a speech that would just contradict everything they might say, that would hurt them, that would he is a living rebuke of all politicians. I've heard Brian Doherty calls Ron Paul a living, breathing rebuke of liberals. That's true, but he's a living, breathing rebuke of Republicans and conservatives also, because he is principled and they are not. And he has good, logical, reasonable principles and they do not. So I think their thinking here is we can't, if we totally ignore him, that'll be a story, but if we just show this video, it will seem like we're lauding him. Of course, talking about how many babies he's delivered, that's nice and all, and I think that does speak to his character, but it does not speak to the thrust of his political movement at all, and I think that's the reason why. And I just think it's hilarious, and I hope that his delegates go there. Not that I'm like crossing my fingers that he's going to get elected, but that they raise holy hell. I want there to be some kind of eventful, let's just say that, convention. I hope that his counter convention is a huge deal. I've already heard that a large number of media outlets are going there. But this ties into another thing that I was thinking about making a video about earlier. Actually, earlier in the day, someone else had posted that apparently the White House has a website. I don't know if it's whitehouse.gov or someplace where they say people can bring up issues that they want to have discussed, and if they can get 25,000 people to basically sign and say they want this issue addressed, then the executive office, the administration, will respond in some way. Not to say that they'll pass a law or even introduce a law, but that they will address it somehow. And apparently someone put on there that they want the TSA addressed, and there was nearing the number of signatures necessary. Several web outlets, to their credit, were basically promoting this. If I had known about it, I certainly would have been willing to engage in it. And mysteriously, just before, when it was nearing this, they omitted it. That their website went down, and when it came back up, it was gone. This is a really obvious and infantile methodology that governments use to manufacture. Chomsky would say manufacturing consent. I don't know if that's really an accurate way to describe it, but the idea is the government's going to do what it wants to do, what it perceives to be in its own best interests. But they realize that in order to govern effectively, the more they can make their interests seem like the interests of everybody else, the better. And one of the ways they go about doing this is if they can find some kind of constituency somewhere that is advocating what they want, then they will promote that advocacy enormously. That's why very, very often when they sign legislation, they'll have somebody who ostensibly could be to the benefit of their. I know when Obamacare was signed, he had some young children like, oh, they had preconditions and now everything will be fine for them. Or they'll reference these people or groups, or they'll give these people or groups platforms from which to spew their pro-government desires. And then when people, even more when other people argue for things the government doesn't want, then they just ignore it completely, or they make up some BS reason why they can't address it. And so it looks like, at least for all the times, that there are some people who argue for what they're doing, which with a big enough population, you're going to find some people somewhere who basically support almost everything. Some of the police state TSC stuff, I don't think that there are hardly any credible people who actually support that. But a lot of the other stuff, like Obamacare and the wars, sorry to say, but it's true, they can find plenty of constituents who agree with that. And then they can, masquerade in as if they are, doing what the people want, when really they're doing what they want, and they have found some people who assent to that, which is not the same thing. And it's really obvious when events like Obama taking down, well, I'm sure it wasn't him personally, but his administration taking down this poll, because if they were really interested in what people thought, then that would be something that they would be concerned with. And maybe they disagree with it, and they'd say, well, listen, we know the hard facts, we know how dangerous things really are, so we need to have the TSA. And I'm sorry that you have these concerns, but you just don't know everything, which is a line that you take quite a bit. But they'd rather just ignore it. They don't want to have that discussion, because they don't want to have there be any question as to whether or not they're doing what's in the best interest of everybody. Because if people start questioning that's the legitimacy. That's the basis of how they rule. That's the foundation of any regime, really. I think Fringe Elements is correct, and I don't know if he originated this, probably not, but I don't remember hearing it someplace else. The force of arms, the threat of violence is for the people on the margins. It's for the people who question, and they'll be cracked down on to convince the others not to approach the fence, so to speak. But most people are going to be held in the thrall of this is the government is the manifestation of the will of the people to do what they want, even though that's a fallacious ideology. It doesn't make any sense. It relies on polylogism, and there's no science behind it, whatever else. But I think it's interesting. I guess I'll say something. I don't really care anything about Paul Ryan. Wherever it's counted, he has been pro-government. I think it's clear he's someone who has put his finger in the wind, and he realizes, okay, Tea Party, a lot of aggravation about the government, so I am going to, be for drastically cutting the budget so that it will be balanced in 30 years. Again, I know it's shudder to think what the debt would be in 30 years, but we're already past to the point where the numbers have any real meaning. But I'm not discouraged by what Romney has done. I think it would have been great if Ron Paul had been there to give a speech, but he's going to give a counter speech. And Ron Paul's followers are not going to be placated by this. There may be some who are going to vote for Republicans for pragmatic reasons, which I can totally understand. There are people who are going to vote for Obama for pragmatic reasons. I think if you're asking me to put a gun to my head, I think it's much better that Obama stay in office because he's not quite as hawkish. But the main reason is that there will probably be more gridlock that way, because I think that we're still going to have, at the very least, a Republican House and maybe a Republican Senate. And one of the worst things we can ever have in this country is a clean sweep. I mean, we all hope, kind of in our dreams for this government where, it's President Paul and, House Majority Leader Justin Amash and Senate Majority Leader Rand Paul, and, they're all libertarians, and because they have both houses of Congress and the presidency, they start repealing law after law after law. But the point of fact is that that is not happening anytime soon. That's not to say it could never happen. I mean, if we just took the Congress of 1830, maybe it could. If we just put them in there, and they'd be like, oh my God, maybe they'd repeal. And I'm not lauding them. I'm just saying they might have been like, holy crap, this is whoa. But that's not likely to happen. So really the best we can hope for is for gridlock, and in the meantime, the rest of society, and to a lesser extent, the lower subdivisions of the state, the states, namely, react against it. If the federal government is extra lethargic, then the rest of us have time to buy gold, store gold, evangelize, become educated, become safer. In the end, I was right. It was mentioning everyone just get ready to survive. I mean, you always should plan for the worst, hope for the best, and that's certainly been my strategy. And the more lethargic the federal government is, the better chance we have. And I think it would be a disaster if Romney were to be elected and then they got a majority in the House, and God forbid a majority in the Senate also. That would be just terrible. Bush had that for a little while, and it was just... And then, of course, the other thing besides the pure legislative politicking is I like there to be an opposition. And people can debate about this, and I could make... I just was recently reading some very bellicose things regarding Israel and Iran. Very worrying things. In fact, the most worrying thing I've read in a long time. But you go into the comments and you realize that liberals are not the only stupid people out there. That there's a lot of right-wing conservatives who are absolutely homicidal in their ignorance. And those people all hate Obama. And I think it's better that people like that hate the chief executive than adore him, or at the very least give him a grudging acceptance, which is the case that would have with Romney. So for their sakes, I hope Obama would get reelected. So we'll see what happens. But there's been a lot of talk actually all year that this is probably another video, but this would I don't know that much, so it would be mostly speculation. There's a lot of talk that Israel is seriously talking about striking Iran sometime this fall at the latest. Now, the optimist in me thinks that this is hopefully they're talking up, they're bluffing because they want to get something out of it. But Benjamin Netanyahu is in the Likud party, and the Likud party are zealots. I mean, in the truest sense, you know, the term zealot is a reference to a Jewish cult in the 1st century A.D. that rebelled against the Romans. They thought that was the apocalypse, and they launched a rebellion and famously defended the Herodian fortress of Masada against the Romans, and they were defeated. They all committed suicide at the end. The Likud party is not ideologically or religious in that sense, but they are politically like that, and they're just fanatically racist, fanatically Zionist. And not all Zionists are racist, but in general a lot of them are. But the Likud party, I mean, a lot of the original Zionists were kind of, they're very, very, very socialist, left-wing egalitarians who just thought Jews should have their own state. Like that, I'm talking now like Golda Meir and Ben Gurion, who they were all terrorists too, and like they did horrible, terrible things also. But like the Likud party is like one of the, they're scary, and Benjamin Netanyahu is fucking scary, and they have like plenty of hydrogen bombs. At least that's the probable case in Israel, and that's scary, because I don't think that their conventional capabilities are enough to do what they're talking about or what they're threatening. And I think the only way that they could make good on their threats is if they started going nuclear. And God forbid that ever happens. That would be really, really, really bad. Like, potentially, there is no limit to how bad that could be. And that's not even pessimism. So that's terrible news. Romney would be worse in that situation than Obama is, but Obama is, you know, he's rhetorically a dove, but not really. And if you listen to his most hawkish speeches that he'll ever give are always to AIPAC, and that's really disconcerting. So we might think that, okay, maybe they'll be a little dovish here or there, but when it's regarding Israel, politicians really think Israel is their sugar daddy. And it's not really true. Like, the federal government has the power to tell Israel to fuck themselves, but they don't. They think that they can't. So, anyway, I don't want to get into the whole story there, but hopefully there won't be a war with Iran, and we'll not all end up in bomb shelters. Of course, we won't be in government bomb shelters because they would shoot us if we tried to get them, but, you know, our own privately made ones. So, anyway, that's it. Because True Blood's about to be on, so I gotta go.